My name is David Harris. I'm the Managing Director at the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice. We're very pleased that you could come, and we're really extremely happy to have with us today Ron Hampton, somebody who people who have been kind of involved in and following police relations work over the last couple of decades know the name. He's a former officer, but has also been a very, very prominent, active, and forceful voice in helping us think through as a nation how we change the way in which policing takes place and how we effectively involve and engage communities of color in their own destiny. I first met him when we were doing some work on the death penalty several years ago, and it gives you a sense of the reach of his interests, that his concerns are not simply with policing, but with the entire criminal justice system in this country. So I'm not going to go into much more detail except to ask you to join me in giving him a very warm welcome. Ron?
All right. Good morning. No, I'm sorry. Good afternoon. The time is really something else. But first of all, let me thank David and Professor Ogletree and the Institute up here for the invitation to come and share with you all today something about the work that I've been involved in now for an awful long time. At least it seems like a lifetime. And I know I look young. I don't look that old, but I've invested and spent an awful lot of time. I'd like to start off with just a little history. I know my time, your time is limited, and I want to give or provide some opportunity for some questions and whatnot at the end. I started in policing in 1970. I had been to school, Vietnam, been in the military, been to Vietnam and came back home. Really wasn't interested in police work because I had some real sour experiences when I came back from Vietnam here in the States because I had gotten injured. And so I really wasn't thinking about that. But there was this organization called the National Criminal Justice Reference Service. And at that time, GE was the contractor for the National Criminal Justice Reference Service. And I took the job, really enjoyed it because my job was to open up the mail, read the request, go into the catalog system, pull out the information, and then send it to the person who was asking for this information. And you can't do that without reading all of the stuff that was going on. And if you remember, we were just coming out of the riots. Policing, there was an awful lot of money in policing for research, studies, and all those kind of things. I remember the first time I read or heard about the Kansas City Patrol experiment. And there was a variety of studies that were going on. So I said, dog, well, if policing is like this, you know, if there's some component of policing like this is where I want to be, because I'm really interested in looking at how policing manifests itself in our community. I know a lot of the stories and things that were going on, but I say I can have something to do with that. I joined the police department, and all of a sudden, all of that went out the window, because it reminded me of my days in basic training when I tell you what to do and you do it, and then that's it. And I wasn't that kind of person. So I spent my time in the police academy pushing back on the whole idea that they were paying me all of this money to go out and provide public safety and protection for people in my community, and they wanted me to do it their way rather than to give me the opportunity to go out there and do it in the kind of way that provided services by, first of all, engaging people who lived in those communities. And I lived in my community. I lived in Washington, D.C. I was born and raised there. So I come out of the police academy and get assigned to Adams Morgan, the 3rd District. That's uptown Washington, D.C. Well, not too uptown, but uptown Washington, D.C. And I lived in Adams Morgan also, because when I got assigned to the 3rd District, I actually moved across town because I wanted to be able to walk to work. So it wasn't a secret. I didn't hide my uniform. I lived on Columbia Road. And then I was fortunate, though. My first assignment was walking U Street. And I'm talking about U Street in the old days, not U Street today. Because U Street today don't look nothing like U Street in the 1970s. You know, that was the black Mecca in Washington, D.C. And all the hustlers, all of the people who, the colorful folks in Washington, D.C. worked U Street. And my beat was 7th Street to 16th Street, V Street to T Street. And man, I'm telling you, I just had a gorgeous time. There were 3 movie theaters on my beat. Ben's Chili Bowl was on my beat. I mean, it was just unbelievable. But I spent that time getting to know the community and working with people down there. And so, of course, that all came to an end, 3 years, and I get signed to an Adams Morgan. And so my footbeat in Adams Morgan was pretty much the same, Harbor Street to Calorama, 16th Street to 18th Street. And I lived at 1673 Columbia Road. So I lived on my footbeat. And it was the kind of experience that, again, allowed me to engage and work in the community that I lived in. There were an awful lot of police officers on the police department that didn't want to live in the city. They were opposed to residency. I was one of those officers, and plus the organization that I represented, we pushed for residency. And when Mayor Berry got elected the first time, we were able to encourage and support the mayor having residency in Washington, D.C. And I think that meant all the world in terms of bringing blacks, not only in the police department, but also on the fire trucks, working in the fire system. There were no blacks driving fire trucks in Washington, D.C. in the early 70s. And the reason that changed was because of residency, because we had a police and fire cadet program that brought young people from the school system as a cadet into the system, and then when they turned 21, they could go over to being a firefighter or a police officer. All of those things really meant an awful lot. But one of the things that we found out is that, and wasn't surprised about, and that was that there was an awful lot of police brutality going on in Washington, D.C. And black police officers really wasn't paying attention to it. And so when we started our organization in 1973, we really brought attention to the kind of things that was going on. Let me give you an example about the history. Prior to 1961, black police officers, and black police officers have been around in the system, say like the middle 1840s, because there were actually all black police departments, not departments, but divisions in places like Dallas and New Orleans, because they only worked in the black community. They couldn't work in the white community. So in general, police officers, black police officers couldn't arrest white people. And in my city, black police officers couldn't arrest white people. Now, if they witnessed one committing a crime, you could hold them, go to the call box, and then call a white officer to read him his rights. But I couldn't read, as a black police officer, I couldn't read a white person his rights. And that was because that black folks were inferior. We were only 3/5 of a human being. So we couldn't arrest someone and read their rights to them if they were superior to us. So after 61, that changed. But up until 1969, black and white officers couldn't work together. Scout cars in the police department was not integrated, even the fire service. And I know in my city there was one black bed in every fire station in the city. And that black bed was for who? The one black firefighter that worked in that firehouse. Other than that, that was it. It was so bad on our department that there was even a black promotional list. And the black promotional list for black folk only went up to sergeant. And the only way you could go from officer to sergeant is that if there were only 5 black sergeants on the Metropolitan Police Department, one of them had to die in order for you to get promoted. Now, you could have passed the test, but you had to wait until one of those 5 died because there was only 5 positions for black sergeant on the Metropolitan Police Department. So, you know, knowing and having that as a history and a backdrop, we had our work cut out for us. There were times in 1972, 73, the N-word was used so loosely in roll call that you thought that it was okay. And that's the kind of raw racism that was going on in the police department. I'll never forget, I had been on the department about 5 years, and we had gone to roll call. We was working midnights. And so after they had roll call, they line up so they can look at your uniform, check your weapon. If they're going to do that, I think they did it about once a week. So we were standing in this line. It was a white officer standing next to me, and Officer Ellis was standing on the other side of him. And just earlier, a few minutes in roll call, a rape had been read, and it was a rape of a black woman. And the white officer had used the N-word talking about the woman must have deserved it, something like that, right? And so when we were standing in line being inspected, he said it again. Officer Ellis stepped out from the line to the front and hit him upside his head and knocked him out so much. His feet flew up in the air like this when his head went back. And then the roll call room had a concrete floor. They couldn't revive him. They had to call the ambulance and all of that. But to make a long story short, when roll call was over with, Sergeant Mills, the operations sergeant, came in the room because he had heard what had happened. And so the officer says, well, what are you going to do? One of the white officers said, well, what are you going to do about what happened? And the sergeant said, what do you mean? He said, you didn't see him knock him? He said, I didn't see anything. So y'all better go ahead and hit the street. That was it. And he didn't want to, he did see it, but he didn't want to do anything because, see, if he had to do something about that, he had to do something about the casual use of the N-word in roll call. So they didn't want to do that, so it was poetic justice that evening. But that was fantastic as far as I'm concerned, because I never heard the N-word again in roll call, as long as I was there, and I was there for 23 years. I never heard that again. So, sometimes those things can be a deterrent. So that sent us on a journey that pretty much took me all over the world, literally taking me all over the world. We have been involved in policing issues in Canada, the UK, all over the UK, even up in the northern part of Europe with the Gypsy people. We've been in South Africa, we've been in South America, we have done work throughout the Caribbean, and I don't care, wherever we went, we always thought we had heard the worst story that we could ever hear until we got to the next place and then heard another story. That was how racist it was in policing, and to some extent still is. The only thing that's different now is they know that it's against the law, so they don't practice it outward. It's still institutionalized. So it has really driven the work that we've been involved in. And I realized that as David was talking about a variety of things that I've been involved in, and also our organization, I've realized that all of this is connected. I don't have the luxury of thinking that the fact that blacks are disproportionately affected by the criminal justice system, that isn't also tied to the educational system in our country. That is also tied to the job system in our country, or the lack of jobs in our country. That is also tied to opportunity and how much opportunity we're going to see. They come in our community talking about, I had to deal with this long time ago, and then it popped this ugly head up again about, what do we do with young people who have their summers open and don't have anything to do? I say, well, send them overseas so they can have the opportunity to study abroad like everybody else does. Because, see, keeping them in the city don't do anything. But I know some young people who have gone abroad and studied. It has changed their life. It's unbelievable what it has opened up for them. So let's send them abroad. Don't send them down to the police precinct. Don't talk about scared straight, because scared straight is crazy. It don't mean anything. You can get used to being in jail. You really can. Yeah, if you got to stay there long enough, you can get used to it. But if you send them overseas, they can get used to that. And it opens up their horizons, just unbelievably so. So the work that we've done has really been exciting in terms of these issues. But things haven't changed. In some ways, things have. We've seen, like some of the issues and things that have happened in the last year. Let me just touch on this for a minute. The president, and I saw Professor Ogletree in Washington, I think he was testifying before the President's Commission on the 21st century policing. And I think that's fantastic that he pulled that together. I didn't necessarily agree with a whole lot of the people that were selected to serve on the panel. I had to be honest, you know. Charles Ramsey? No, sir. No, sir. I thought that was crazy. You know, he ain't done anything for policing. And especially for policing when we talk about the manifestation of policing on people of color, black and brown communities. I just thought that was crazy. But it's necessary, so we participated. Have you seen the recommendations? Have anybody read the recommendations? All right. Let me tell you when I read the recommendations and what I came up with. It reminded me of the Kerner Commission report recommendations. Now, if you think I'm kidding, go back and read Kerner first, and then read that. Then after you finish reading Kerner, read the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration report around 1970 or 73, the LEA report, because it was a report, a commission that did a report on the 3 sections of the criminal justice system. And then they issued these recommendations, very good recommendations. And then I think in the 80s there was another report, policing in I think in the 21st century or society or something like that. Excellent recommendations. So the 21st century recommendations, to me, leave out the stuff about technology because there was no technology in '68. But the report almost reads the same issues that Kerner read in 1968. And so I'm not a proponent of reform. I'm a proponent of restructuring because we've been reforming the criminal justice system for over 40 years and nothing has happened. If anything, it has gotten worse. So I don't know why we keep, it's like the definition of insanity. That's what it reminds me of. Because nothing has happened. For the first half of this year, we have killed more people than we have probably in 20 years at the hands of police. Deaths in custody, the whole nine. I mean, it's just unbelievable the kind of work that's going on. So we're working now with there are folk like the Institute of the Black World. Dr. Ron Daniels has established a police reform and accountability task force. We talk often. I'm serving as the chair of the task force. We talk often back and forth, but I don't like to use the word reform, but it sort of flows with the title, so we use it. But the fact of the matter is that reform isn't going anywhere. So we have to have some radical change if it's going to work. Let me give you an idea of some radical change that I think we need to adopt. There needs to be citizen control of the police in this country. Now, someone should say, well, where is that working? It's working in the UK. It's working in Toronto. It's working in other parts of Canada. It's working in New Zealand. It's working in Australia. It almost works in LA. The LA Police Commission. They're charged with the responsibility of hiring and firing the police chief. And the police chief only gets to complete 2 terms. Then after that, he or she has to go somewhere else. They also participate in the shaping and development of policies and practices as it relates to policing in that city. That's what we need. But I even wanted to be stronger than that, because anything less than that, then we're going to find ourselves in the same place, because the police unions and the police have all the power. And, you know, people say, know that I'm a former police officer, they just can't imagine that a person who served in policing would want less police. I want way less police. Not less, I want way less police. That's what I want. Because it hasn't proven to be an advantage for us in our community. And I work with Hispanics an awful lot. It's the same experience that they have also. So it's not working for us. But we can do that. We can have citizen control of our police departments. What we've had now, in the past up to now, hasn't worked. The citizen complaint review boards, some of them, you know, the results are real sketchy in terms of their effectiveness. Most of the time, the police don't like to cooperate. The unions fight against them. And so it creates a real problem for us. And police unions, too. I don't believe that we're going to successfully challenge and restructure policing in this country if we don't take on the police unions. The police unions think that they are the most powerful unions, and they probably are. They probably are the most powerful in the country in terms of unions. We just had in our city the police union just about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, just took their second vote of no confidence in the chief of police in our city. Now, I'm going to be frank with you. I don't like her. I really don't. And it's not because it don't have nothing to do with a female, don't have nothing to do with anything other than I think she's two things. She hasn't been effective and she stayed too long. Those are the reasons. But I don't care that the union has taken a vote of no confidence in the chief of police because the police department don't work for the union. The chief don't work for the union. The chief works for the mayor and the city, and that's who the police officers work for. That's who pays their salary. So that's who they ought to be paying attention to, not the police union. Because I could care less about the police union. The police union don't do anything. Over 85% of the police officers that work in our city, guess where they live? Somebody guess where they live? That's exactly right. They don't live in Washington, D.C. And they even had the nerve at the last election to hold a debate, a mayoral forum, and then voted to support somebody that was running for mayor in our city. And 85% of the police officers don't even live in the city. Come on, let's be real. Who are they going to influence? So, I mean, so there's a wake-up call that needs to take place when we talk about policing today. Because they're jerking us around. And I saw it firsthand. I want to tell you I saw it firsthand. My whole police career, every now and then when I got tired of playing them games, I would issue a test. I would construct a situation or find myself in a situation and then do a test. Matter of fact, I had the pleasure of being in one of the books that Professor Ogletree authored, where I was coming home from work one evening driving my car, and the police officer pulled me over. I was covered up. He couldn't see my uniform, so he pulls me over and then started running his mouth, talking about the car and all that kind of stuff. And so when I challenged him, and what I said to him, I said, well, because I asked him, I said, well, what did you stopping me for? Because the general order cites that you're supposed to inform me of a violation. He looked at me real funny when I said that. Then when I got out the car, soon as he saw that I was a police officer, he turned around and started walking back to his car and wouldn't even answer me. He wanted to know why didn't I tell him I was a police officer. So my thing to him, do I have to tell you I'm a police officer to get respect? I don't think so. So those are the kind of things. But we're operating, these are serious times. And lastly, let me say this, because David and I talked about this. If there's any hope for restructuring, this is the time. The young people today, Black Lives Matter, the young people in my city, we were having an event down at Busboys and Poets in Washington, D.C., and I mean it was standing room only. And a lot of the young people from Black Lives Matter and from the local movement in D.C. were there. We left out of there. We left out of Busboys and Poets. They walked up the street to 5th and New York Avenue and laid down in the middle of the street, stopped all the traffic. stopped all of the traffic, just bundled up everything. And the police had to ask them 3 times to move. Not one after another either, but had to ask them 3 times. And on the 3rd time, if they don't move, then they can make the arrest. Well, on the 3rd time they ask them, they get up and then go to another location and lay down in the middle of the street. Oh, they are bad. And they're courageous too. That takes courage. And don't think that it's all show, because they're also working on the background too. They have a group of lawyers that they're working with that's taking apart pieces of legislation and examining and doing analysis on it and looking at the kind of things that we need to be doing to take control of our communities back from the police and those politicians who aren't doing the job. They're thorough. So I have a lot, I'm very optimistic this time. Because see, we worked hard. There's no question about it. But to some extent, some of us started enjoying the games of the 70s and 80s. And those games were very temporary, very topical. You know, because, for example, we have less black police officers today than we had 25 years ago. There are less black chiefs of police today than we had 25 years ago. There might even be less, we hardly ever had any women in executive roles. And they're almost non-existent too today. So we've really lost a lot of ground. But see, what was happening is that while we were working our way into the position, we were mainly using the courthouse. Wasn't nobody giving us nothing. We were mainly using the courthouse, those affirmative action cases that were going through the courts and whatnot. That's how we got to where we were. And challenging the laws and the policies around recruitment and all those kind of things. Even black police organizations were working with police departments to bring black men and women and Hispanics onto the police department. But while they was doing that, the white folks were sitting back with their arms crossed and their legs crossed, just waiting because they knew it was going to be a run on time. And that's exactly what happened. When it was all over with, they came back with a vengeance, and they've been cleaning house ever since then. If you look at my police department, everybody up at the top of my police department is white. And it didn't take this chief very long to change that either. And so you walk in there now, you don't hardly see any brothers and sisters anywhere. And you would think because she's a woman who had been the victim of several sexual harassment complaints at one, you would think that you would see some women up in there too. But what she did, came in there and hooked up with the old boy system, and they've been taken over. So, and that's just not my city. That's across the country. When you talk about what the face of law enforcement looks like now. So we have some work to do. We have an awful lot of work to do. And the only way I think we're going to win this time is to be working with these young people who are out there courageous, willing to do any and everything they can because they recognize it. Now, the thing that they recognize is that they're going to be the ones that inherit all of this. And so if it don't look no better than it is now, then they'll be promoters and inheriting the same thing that's going on right now. And I don't think they really want that. I've seen these young people in Black Lives Matter. If this was a press conference and I said something that they didn't like, they'd be standing on chairs and sounding me out. And I'm with that because I get tired of listening to it myself. So, you know, you may not like it, but it's getting the job done. And so I salute them, and I'm gonna be right there with them. And I don't want no position. I don't want anything. I want to be right there with them so I can share my experiences with them so they won't make the same mistakes all over again. But see, that's the important part. We all have a role to play in it. All right? I want to stop now, and then I think I've covered most of it. Although, let me just say this. There's a movement in the working with Dr. Daniels and them at the Institute of the Black World, we've created these justice collaboratives in 3-4 places in the city, in the country rather, in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. And the Justice Collaborative is a coalition of about 30 to 40 social justice organizations that work on a variety of issues. He got the idea from working himself, doing the work that he's been doing over the years. And what we're doing is that we meet every 90 days. Whatever you work on. But every now and then we come together to identify issues and concerns that all 40 groups work on together to get it done. In Washington, D.C., we did that with Initiative 71, the decriminalization of marijuana. The first time it had ever been done as a result of using the social justice foundation to change the law. In that group, we went out and did the work, working with the religious communities. When we started, they had polled, DPA had polled, Drug Policy Alliance had polled the African American community, and the support for Initiative 71 was around 36%. When we finished, it had gone from 31% to over 73% in favor of Initiative 71. But because the studies that the ACLU had done along with the Lawyers Committee looked at the disproportionality that was taking place as a result of marijuana arrests and minor traffic arrests, as well as nonviolent crime. And it was unbelievable in a city where black folk only represent now, because the chocolate city don't exist no more. 50% black folk getting arrested 92, 93% of the time for those kind of crimes. Unbelievable. And I'm talking about in areas where black folk didn't even make up 10% of the population when you go uptown, real uptown. So we were able to change that, utilizing the DC Justice Collaborative and that foundation that we set up. And so again, we have a collaborative in Pittsburgh. In Pittsburgh, we're looking at the Leeds project, the one that they do in Seattle, the law enforcement assisted diversion. Also, we have one in Baltimore and as well as in Philadelphia. So I'll just throw it open for some questions. You know, that's an awful lot to digest. That's an awful lot to talk about. Thank you.
And I want to say thank you, too, because you truly are on the ground with those of us in the movement, and you have been an incredible help and support to formerly incarcerated women who are across the country organizing ourselves to create change. And I just wanted to say thank you for that real support on the ground. My question is to you. Coming here to Harvard University to speak, we have something called justice reinvestment that is currently being co-opted to put a pause on the passing more immediately of timely legislation that would correct a lot of the things that you're speaking to, particularly in terms of criminal justice reform. Can you just say, what do you think the role is of an institute like Harvard, like the Pew Institute, like other places that are putting out this research that is being used to slow down the process, because we're being told, those of us pushing for these criminal justice reform passages of this legislation are being told that we're going to wait until these really great places come out with the research to help us push forward justice reinvestment. What would you say to Harvard about helping us really to move forward?
Oh man, let me do this. First of all, one of the things that we've been doing this for some time, and I know Andrea. I met her when we was in Denver, Colorado. She had made it out there, and we worked with her in when they met, formerly incarcerated women met in Washington, D.C. We can't afford to be working in silos, so I've been working with the formerly incarcerated people in my city for an awful long time, because I grew up with some of them. We lived and worked in the same communities, went to school together. just unfortunately some things happen, but that's no reason to break friendships and not be working together on these issues. The system has victimized enough people, and formerly incarcerated people are part of that community that's been continually victimized. I don't know what's wrong with all of the information and studies that we already have that really have provided the foundation for the work that we've been doing for the last 20, 30 years. And those studies are continually updated. People are going back, looking at that work, as well as providing the foundation for the work that we continue to do. I mean, the numbers aren't going to change. It sort of reminds me of, I'm not speaking against them, but part of the process, there's part of the right now that's involved in the police reform, criminal justice reform movement. And I heard the other day, I was watching some of them on television talking about, well, it's spending a lot of money. We're spending a lot of money with it. Well, what about the human life that's been lost? What about the lives of people that's been damaged? What about the communities that's been stripped of the families and the resources and all of the things? What about that? Does that matter? Does people's lives matter? Does the community matter? Yeah, it costs a lot of money, but that was money that the right wanted to spend because they believed in locking people up for extended periods of time, throwing away the key, taking away their rights, a whole host of things. I'm not sure we need any more studies and analysis that we already have. It seemed like to me that that's a waste of time. And clearly, this is a time, this is a window that's really, I believe, limited. And so we have to be working. I don't necessarily like the idea of working with some of these guys on the right. But if we can get to where we're going and still maintain our true sense of what we're doing it for, then maybe we ought to work with them. But I'm still watching them with both eyes because I just haven't got to the place that I trust them, and that. But I think we ought to be honest. We ought to be certainly honest about it. Yeah, you're right. I'm not planning on living with any of them, but if they want to, absolutely. But if they want to work with us to de-incarcerate the prisons, if they want to work with us to move toward real drug reform laws, strip the mandatory minimums and those kind of things, then I'm absolutely for that. If they want to do it because it costs money, well, I want to do it because it saves lives. And so we can meet somewhere and get it done, and then after that, I'm going back to where I came from because I won't be going with them. All right? So.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for coming to speak with us today. My question has two parts, and they all have to do with counter-surveillance using cameras, because I think right now we're hearing that, body cameras or civilians using cameras will be a good way for us to counter police violence. So the first part is, what do you think about body cameras? And then the second part is, how do you think that communities of color specifically can use cameras, cell phones that we carry around in order to try to push back against the power that police officers use for that?
Well, I think cameras are a good idea, but they're not 100% the solution for stopping police violence, because we've already seen it on cameras, and the results are the same as it's been when it's been when we've seen it before, because if we don't see it, then we don't see it. But we have seen it on cameras, and the results have stayed the same. The police officer who choked Eric Gardner out walked away free. And what I saw was a chokehold. It was clear to me. He didn't have to do that. And for selling cigarettes, it's totally, absolutely crazy. It's unheard of. I just can't imagine that. But we got to be careful. I tell you, we have to be careful about the development of policies as it relates to the use of the camera. For example, if they had cameras in my city, and I think there's a pilot project going on there, when the police officer come to my house and say he's coming to my house because there was a burglary overnight or during the day and I get home in the evening, right? Or he can't come in my house with his camera on. He has to take that off. He has to cut it off. because my house is my house. I'm not going for that invasion. I'm not going to do that. Because see, if something is in there in plain view, then the police can make an arrest. And see, and I don't know what's in my house. I really don't. And you all don't know what's in your house either. Because people come in and out of them all the time. So you don't know what's in your, unless you go through a fine-tooth comb after your friends leave. But sometimes people, for example, sit down on your sofa, they may have a joint in their pocket. You know, you can't, people don't smoke in my house, but, and I mean cigarettes and everything else, but say that person who came in there lost a joint and is sitting in my house, right? Well, under the present law, it wouldn't be no arrest. But in the past, then they could have arrested me because marijuana was illegal. So I just don't think we ought to do that. The other thing is that if we're going to come up with policies, say, for example, the mayor and our city want to have talking about having a policy where if it happens in the street, then you're entitled to look at it. But if you're involved in it, an incident where you're involved with the police, they don't want to release that. Now, that's total crazy. I mean, that's the whole idea of having cameras, the transparency of it. So I just think that we're going to have to wrestle with that, although there are some good policies and practices out there. In Seattle, for example, and a few other cities, they have some good policies and practices when it comes to the use of the camera. But we can't rely on the cameras to somehow never solve this problem. I would hope that we would also be looking at something like a special prosecutor, someone who prosecutes police officers, and that's all he or she does all day long. Because we know other prosecutors can't do it because they are biased toward the police officers that they work with. And so I've seen it. You know, we have seen it in New York. We've seen it all over the country. And we've seen prosecutors who have gone out to address police violence, and then we've watched how they've been victimized and pointed out by the police and harassed. So we need a special prosecutor, and they need to be very serious, somebody who's not going to back away or be intimidated or afraid of police. But I would like to see that kind of system. And that has to be somebody who's either going to be appointed by the governor, the mayor. I don't even want the Justice Department involved in it, because the Justice Department is so pro-police, it's unbelievable. You know, they really are. And, you know, and so I don't want to disturb that. So what we had to do is come up with a system whereby we can identify, select, appoint special prosecutors whose job it is to prosecute police officers. And then they need, once that starts, they need to go to work. All right? Yes, sir.
Sir, there's the us versus them in almost all species of animals, including our own. I call it the respect gap. Do you think that we could do more formally by focusing on the respect gap in education and in police departments and in football teams, etc.?
Respect
Respect is the most fundamentally important value.
And who needs to respect who, though?
Everyone has to respect everyone else.
Okay. Oh, well, I mean, I think respect is important. But from my place and my experience, what I've observed is that the average citizen, I think, has more respect for the police than police have respect for them. And so what I've witnessed, for example, is that the police sometimes will take the fact that a young man who gets involved in criminal activity lives in a certain community. So the police will take that information and then conclude that that entire community somehow now is involved in crime rather than that one individual. See, and what happens is that it's sort of like this. There's this term that we use in our community sometimes when we talk about crime, one person against another person, black on black. In my life, I've never heard nobody address white on white crime, Hispanic on Hispanic crime. And the fact of the matter is, if you look at the Uniform Crime Report, most crime is race on race crime, not the opposite. But we don't use those words in our society. So we could start by respecting one's dignity by not using that, for example. This whole notion that black on black crime is so out of proportion that we have to worry about black people in black communities. And the fact of the matter is that those studies that Andrea was talking about, some of those studies will point out and show that some of the most significant gains in race-on-race crime has taken place in the black community in reducing the violence in our community. But when you listen to people talk, you wouldn't get that. So yeah, I think we could definitely use respect as a foundation. But the police have to respect us. Now, whether they like me or not, I don't even care. Whether they want to live in the community with me, personally, I don't care. But they need to respect me. And that can be demonstrated in a variety of ways. All right? Yes, sir.
I just have a comment off of what was just said, and I think that you add the respect gap also brings forth entitlement. And right now, I feel like the police feel like because they deserve a certain amount of respect, they are entitled. And at times that brings forth ego, and a lot of people have been hurt into feeling this entitlement and respect. So I think that you're making a good point about respect, but I think that there needs to be some tweaks within that respect because there's an entitlement that's happening, and that's not okay.
There's a certain level of camaraderie in this that I think exists in every profession. You know, lawyers don't tell on lawyers, doctors don't tell on doctors, police sure don't tell on police, firefighters don't tell on firefighters. But the fact of the matter is that sometimes there needs to be a cleansing that takes place when you see something wrong. Somebody has to say something. And part of saying something is also a deterrent that cleanses the system of those who don't have no business there in the first place. And so we need some of that to take place. It's not unusual. It's not unusual to see those kind of reactions and response and behavior in professions. But clearly, with the power that police officers have in our society, this whole notion about that you can be working and the person commits a crime and then you don't say anything, is something wrong with that. When most of the time, our codes, at least in D.C., says that if a police officer, for example, witnesses a crime, then he's also part of the, what's the term? You can be also charged as an accomplice. That's the word I was looking for. If you don't do something, you're required to do something. And so we see an awful lot within the ranks of policing doing that. All right? Yes, sir. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just struck by your discussion about how we went into the police academy and hit the street. Everything was kind of, I've heard that from so many ex-police officers that police academy is one thing, but then the street is completely another. And at the same time, talking about this is not time for reform, and because the form's not going to cut it, and how we've got to do some fundamental restructuring. Looking at it from the point of view that the police in general are an instrument by which those who run this country keep things, with the 0.1% per se. And if you're talking about restructuring and going up against this, it seems like you're taking on quite a bit. One. Two is that the plans have to go for more than just some reforms. And three, going into this whole thing about the activism, that the police and their backers were put on defense, not on the defensive over the past year by people taking to the streets and laying down the middle, and it brought tremendous publicity. And that, but yet we've seen it ebb where things have come falling back. And how do you see this activism changing the way everyone's looking at this so that we can get to a point where we're saying not one more air guard, whatever it takes, not one more, it's done. with Huntington's?
Well, I don't know. I can only relate to you stories that I've seen in Washington, D.C. 2 weeks ago, you live in D.C.? Okay. Well, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, the mayor came out with a statement about what she wanted, what she would like to see, right? And she was going to prepare some legislation. So she had a press conference out in Southeast, Malcolm X Elementary School, and she started talking about what she wanted. The Black Lives Matter young people was there. They interrupted the thing. They totally just shut it down. And she tried to talk over them, but they shut it down. So there's been continuous demonstrations ever since then. Now the mayor has also, the legislation has hit the ground. And there are 12 points in the legislation. But some of the most egregious, now this is just one, that crimes committed in and around rec centers will draw, upon the guilty verdict, additional sentencing. Now, who hangs out around rec centers? Black youth in my city. I don't know about nowhere else, but black youth hang out. And the reason they hang out around the rec center is because, so you pay attention to this, that they just have the gym and the gym closed. We used to have like ping pong and table tennis and all that kind of stuff. They don't do that anymore. But they built up the exercise room because the gentrifiers come in and use the exercise room, and then they can pay $75 a year to use it. Now, the only things that go on down there that has some substance is for young people, say like from 6, 12 and under. They still had teams. But there are no more 18, 16 year and under teams. So those young people, they've been going to the rec center for years, so now they don't have anything to do, so they just stand there and mess around. So you ever been in a basketball game and the fight got started in the basketball game? I played basketball all my life. I used to always regularly fight. Now you can get charged and get extra sentencing for being in a fight in the basketball game at the rec center, because they're going to call the police. You can bet that. The other thing is that this is the other thing that just stands out about it. And they're pushing back on all of this. If you are on probation or parole, you already have less rights than a regular person. And some of those less rights involve subject to search, not only you as a person, but say your home. You know, people coming back from incarceration may have more than one home because it's hard to find a place, right? So you want to be able to search all those homes, which they can go into now, but they can't search your home. The police go in with the supervising agent, and so in plain view is open. But the fact of the matter is she want to go past that. And then if she finds something or think that there's a reason, she wants to hold you up to 72 hours, be able to hold you up to 72 hours on that, I think you're involved in something. Do you know that that's unbelievable? And we already understand the limitations that people returning home are already confronted with. And she wants to do that. And yet in our community in Washington, D.C., if you've been there and know anything about it, the most significant factor in reducing violence in the young people in our communities have been the returning citizens who have worked in the schools and in the community, working with people that the police are afraid of. It's unbelievable. And she said when she was running that she wasn't going to do that. But you know what? They're reminding her every day what she said. And I'm involved in that movement because we're not going to let her get away with that. And the young people are not going to let her get away with that. So we're not under any illusions that it's going to change overnight, but we're down for the count. And one thing for sure, I can tell you this, that is, if she wins, she will be a one-term mayor. Because they're going to do everything they can do to get rid of it, because it has to be a penalty. And that's what we haven't been doing, is holding our elected people accountable to what they say or don't say. It's unbelievable. But these young folk, they are following her around the city we've been holding meetings in churches. We really have organized the religious community. Up until this day, just for the last month, we must have been meeting in about 6 churches. And we're having a meeting in a church tomorrow night. And we've been averaging anywhere from, say, 50 to 75 people coming out to these meetings talking about police practices. And when you ask the question in the room, have anyone in the room had a negative reaction to the police or with the police? Almost every hand in the room goes up. And so that documentation is going to be shared with us. We also testified before the city council a couple weeks ago. It started at 5. It wasn't over till 3:30 in the morning. I testified at 11:30. 95% of the people who testified said that her strategy is a wrong-handed strategy. So it's not going to be overnight. But there's a fight that's going on. And I remember some of these fights in the past, and there was a time when we got tired, when we allowed the government to just drag us out. But these young people got all kind of energy. They got all kind of energy, man. I'm telling you. You know, I got to go home at 11, 12 o'clock myself, but they can stay up all night. I think it's, you know, I'm energized by it. I'm encouraged by it. So it's not going to be easy, though. That's not. I'm in no way do I want to leave that impression. But they're laying it down, and that's what we need to do. Yes, sir.
It has to do with the statement you made, and the first question asked is when, and the question he stated is when, and the response is universal. It can't happen overnight. The fact is, it did happen overnight. Before 1870, it was happening.
Right.
We had senators, we had representatives, we had rights. Black men could vote before white women.
Right.
It did happen with that. And what happened with this compromise, disruptive behaviors, etc., all of these things started to happen all over again. They removed protection against black people, underserved people, and didn't have the respect for them, which they did have by law. And with law, things could happen. And I remember in 1960, April 19th, I'll never forget it, my windows were blown out, my double attorney. Attorney Luby's house was blown up. And 10,000 of us marched that day to the State House. And the first thing the governor said, we're going to change things, but we can't do it overnight. You can do it overnight. All you have to do is decide you're going to do it because it's the right thing to do.
That's right.
And in terms of what we do with the kids, we were kids then when this happened. I was kids driving a car in Montgomery, Alabama, and heard these women say to me, I'm doing this, but it won't help me, but my grandkids won't go through this. But their grandkids are going through it right now. And their great-grandkids are going through it. So the time was yesterday, not tomorrow. Right. And it can't happen overnight. If we do get this to the point we said it should happen, it can happen, and it will happen. But that's the only circumstance that will happen. We have to decide it's wrong what you're doing. You got to change it. You don't change it next week, next year, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, with the Supreme Court's decision. You change it today. When we get to that point of how we feel about it, things will change. But that's the only thing that's going to happen. Overnight, how long is night? What the hell? I was 19 years old when this happened.
No, I tell you, no disrespect. You've cited some things that date me, so I know and respect that you're probably a little older than I am. The fact of the matter is, I'm tired. I lay my life down. I don't take the kind of. I'm not taking to all of that stuff anymore. But in terms of my observation working with people, this is a very different energy than at least it was when I was doing it during the 70s and 80s. This is altogether different energy. That kind of, I want it right now. That's what I'm sensing from the young people. And that's the way it should be, because they recognize and sick and tired of what it is that's been going on. And too long, and we've been putting it off. And so I think that that's why the rebellion in Baltimore, that's why the rebellion in Ferguson, that's why there's going to be other rebellions. I'm working with a group of people in Baltimore right now, because if those police officers get off in Baltimore, I can tell you now what's going to happen. I can tell you right now what's going to happen. Because we were gone through all of this, building our hopes with like a graph, you know, a heartbeat graph, thinking that somehow or another something is going to really come from this, only to get to the courthouse, and then they turn the police officers loose. I can tell you what's going to happen if the police officers, all of them, aren't prosecuted successfully, like everywhere else. Because people are tired. People are actually tired. So
Ron, listen, I want to say I think these young people are very fortunate to have you working with me. And I think we're very fortunate to have had you today. And really appreciate it. When you get back again, we'll have some more. In the meantime, thank you all for